Picture this. The man who once bent the map of Europe to his will now lies in a dimly lit chamber on a wind-battered rock in the Atlantic Ocean. Napoleon Bonaparte, the general who terrified kings and redrew borders, is not commanding armies anymore. He is fighting his own body. His enemies could not kill him at Austerlitz, nor could the frozen tundra of Russia. But here, in exile on Saint Helena, something far crueler is dismantling him piece by piece. He clutches his stomach, writhing as a dark, grainy vomit spills from his mouth, the stench of iron and rot filling the room. His fingernails have turned a ghastly blue, his once powerful legs balloon with swelling, and his servants whisper that even standing has become impossible. This is no warrior's death. This is a slow unmaking, a conqueror rotting while still alive. 6 years earlier, Napoleon had marched across France with only 1,000 men, reclaiming his throne without firing a shot. Soldiers sent to arrest him laid down their arms and joined him. Now, that same man cannot hold down a sip of water. He spends entire afternoons submerged in a copper bathtub, the scalding water turning his skin lobster red. He grips the edges until his knuckles whiten, the boiling pain in his gut momentarily dulled only by the heat. To his valet Marchand, the image is unbearable, the emperor reduced to a fragile husk, steaming in a tub like some broken relic. Inside his body, an invisible executioner works relentlessly. A malignant tumor, the size of a clenched fist, coils itself through his stomach lining. Every heartbeat feeds it. Every breath presses it against his organs. His belly distends grotesquely, while his arms, once strong enough to move cannon wheels on the battlefield, waste away into thin sticks of bone and skin. His body is collapsing inward and swelling outward all at once, a grotesque parody of power. And yet, even in these hours of torment, Napoleon's pride lingers. He dictates his will with the precision of a campaign order, calculating which enemy should be insulted one last time, which loyalist should be rewarded. The body may be failing, but the mind still fights for legacy. But the truth, the disturbing, hidden truth, is that what killed Napoleon wasn't just disease. It was the so-called medicine of his age. His doctors, armed with mercury, knives, and torture disguised as treatment, would turn his last weeks into something no battlefield could rival in horror. Before we descend into that nightmare, pause for a moment. If you want the darkest, most unfiltered truths of history, the kind they never teach in classrooms, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Because what comes next is the kind of story you won't forget. If disease was one executioner, medicine was the other. Napoleon's final months on Saint Helena became a theater of cruelty disguised as treatment. The British physicians attending him believed they were practicing science. In truth, they were inflicting agonies that would be outlawed as torture today. When constipation locked his intestines, they prescribed calomel, mercury chloride, a poison potent enough to kill a healthy man in high doses. 10 grains slid down his throat, and soon after, his chamber filled with the stench of decay. Napoleon passed his first stool in weeks, black as tar and reeking of blood. His servants recoiled in horror. His doctors, blind to the devastation, called it progress, and immediately prescribed another dose. The more they treated him, the more his body disintegrated. Mercury stripped his insides raw, tearing at the very stomach the tumor had already turned malignant. Each cure only peeled another layer of him away. Then came the blistering plasters, patches of crushed beetles pressed against his chest, calves, and feet. The idea was that searing burns on the skin would draw out sickness from within. In reality, Napoleon's jaundiced body blistered and oozed, as if they were deliberately burning him alive while cancer gnawed his organs. But the worst indignity came when his doctors decided mercury should not only be swallowed but forced directly into his body. They restrained him. Yes, the Emperor of France, who had once commanded millions, and drove an enema of mercury-laced water up through him. The man who had stared down musket fire without flinching screamed. Not a dignified cry of pain, but a raw, humiliating scream that echoed through Longwood House. Witnesses said he turned his face to the wall afterward, refusing to look at anyone, broken not just in body but in spirit. The results were nightmarish. His bowels expelled stool mixed with pieces of his own stomach lining. His digestive tract was literally falling apart in chunks, dissolving into the very fluids dripping from him. His vomit turned red with blood, and soon even tissue, flesh from the inside, came up in clumps. His eyes, once a steely gray that froze generals in place, burst with blood vessels until the whites turned crimson. He was disintegrating alive, piece by piece, while men in white coats assured each other that the treatment was working. Think about the irony. Napoleon had outmaneuvered coalitions of armies, had cheated death on a dozen battlefields. But in exile, surrounded not by soldiers but by surgeons, he endured a fate no enemy could have engineered, a death dragged out by medicine itself. By late April, Napoleon's body was no longer just failing, it was betraying him. His once unmatched mind, that relentless engine of strategy and calculation, began to crack under the weight of pain and poison. But it didn't fade quietly into silence. It erupted into visions so vivid that his servants could follow along as though battles were being refought in real time. He would bolt upright in bed, his skeletal arms waving across invisible maps, calling out flanking maneuvers to generals who weren't there. "Send in the guard," he shouted to shadows on the walls. In his mind, he was no longer confined to a suffocating bedroom on a forsaken island. He was back at Austerlitz, orchestrating one of history's greatest victories. Soldiers long dead marched again through the corridors of Longwood House, summoned by the delirium of their dying emperor. His attendants wept openly. Count Montholon whispered that the sight of Napoleon reliving glory in such misery was more unbearable than the illness itself. Imagine it. The same voice that had once made Europe tremble now cracked with fever as it rallied phantom troops. His mind clung to the only thing that had ever defined him: command. Even as his bowels emptied uncontrollably, even as he vomited blood, he was still trying to lead an army. At times, his hallucinations were tender, even heartbreaking. He called out for Josephine, his first wife, who had been dead for years. He demanded water as if back in the Egyptian campaign, his parched lips whispering for relief that never came. He begged to walk, insisting emperors don't lie in bed. His servants supported him as he tried. He made it only 3 steps before his legs buckled. As he fell, his swollen stomach convulsed so violently that Ali, his loyal servant since the pyramids, lunged forward to catch him like a child. That scene shattered everyone in the room. For grown men straining to hold down the once unbreakable emperor of France, who struggled to rise, crying out, "Where's my army?" The irony was suffocating. The conqueror of Europe was now prisoner of his own hallucinations, a commander with no troops, a strategist battling ghosts. What was left of his dignity burned away in those last days. Each order he barked into the void was a reminder that the man who had redrawn the map of Europe was now trapped in the most claustrophobic battlefield imaginable, his own decaying body. But the true horror still lay ahead. Because even hallucinations fade, and what replaced them was something worse. A final spiral into physical collapse so grotesque that even seasoned surgeons recoiled at the sight. By May of 1821, Napoleon had entered what physicians call the death spiral. His breathing came in erratic bursts, gasping, then silence, then gasping again, as if his body kept forgetting how to live. His throat swelled shut, leaving him unable to scream, reduced to guttural animal sounds that haunted the walls of Longwood House. The emperor who once spoke with precision and thunderous authority now choked on his own fluids, his voice broken into noises less than human. The room became a grotesque parody of an imperial court. 16 people crowded around his bed, not to take orders but to watch him die inch by inch. His skin, jaundiced yellow from liver failure, mottled into purple patches where oxygen had abandoned him. His famous gray eyes, once weapons sharper than any blade, stared beyond the room, fixed on some horizon only he could see. His last words remained contested. Some swore they heard him whisper, "France, Army, Josephine." Others swore it was, "Head of the Army." Perhaps he spoke to all of them at once, or perhaps they only heard what they wanted from their dying master. At 5:49 p.m. on May 5, 1821, the man who had redrawn the map of Europe, who had turned kings into pawns, simply stopped breathing. No grand gesture, no final order, just silence. The conqueror of nations undone by a hole in his stomach. But the true horror was yet to be revealed. The next day, British surgeons performed the autopsy. When they cut into his abdomen, the smell hit them first, sweet, rotten, unforgettable. Several doctors staggered back, unable to continue. What they found was worse than anyone expected. His stomach was almost entirely cancerous, hard as leather, eaten alive from within. The perforation was so large a surgeon pushed his finger clean through it. White nodules, pearls of metastasized cancer, dotted his intestines. He had been dying for years. And yet, the story doesn't end there. When Napoleon's body was exhumed nearly 2 decades later to be returned to France, the coffin opened to reveal the impossible. He was perfectly preserved. Not skeletal, not decomposed. His features recognizable, his skin pale as marble, his uniform intact. Some claimed arsenic in his system acted as a preservative. Others whispered about secret embalming. But to this day, the sight of his uncorrupted body remains a mystery. One last enigma from a man who defied explanation in life and in death. And that is the real tragedy of Napoleon Bonaparte. The emperor who commanded millions died vomiting pieces of his own stomach, reduced to humiliations so grotesque that history tried to hide them. His last coherent thought was not of glory, not of empire, but of France and his army, his eternal obsession. Today, tourists file past his monumental red tomb in Les Invalides, marveling at the grandeur. But inside lies not a legend, not an immortal, only a man who rotted alive while begging for his soldiers. In the end, death cared nothing for crowns or conquests. It stripped Napoleon of everything, until only silence remained. And if you thought this was horrifying, wait until you hear how England's most notorious king met a fate so gruesome his body literally exploded in the coffin. That story makes even Napoleon's death look merciful.